So how bad is this?
I think that this is the most unrealistic diplomacy since the late 1920s. I think you have to go back to the Kellogg-Briand Pact to end war, to the whole series of disarmament conferences. In the 1920s, the democracies, desperate to avoid dealing with reality, kept designing all sorts of paper documents that were going to end war and that were going to disarm countries. And the problem they had was that the Japanese, the Italians, and the Germans, and the Russians didn't go along with them. So here you had these diplomats getting together. And if you notice today, by the way, the Iranians were laughing, literally laughing, at the idea of sanctions as they build nuclear weapons. So you have the president over here in a fantasy, and it's a fantasy. It sounds good. It would be wonderful. It just doesn't fit this particular planet.
Yeah,
and over here you have North Korea, Pakistan, Iran, Al-Qaeda, and a whole host of other potential enemies who are just methodically doing their thing. And I think the greatest danger is that we will end up confusing words with reality in a way that someday could get an awful lot of people killed.
The only effect I see out of this is that this is going to embolden our adversaries. I thought Jennifer Rubin actually had an interesting take. This president is dangerously obsessed with unilateral gestures and disarmament. Now, the only thing, look, I spoke with Neil Cavuto. I'm going to be on Neil Cavuto's show tomorrow, and I was trying to make the case to him, Neil, this is the worst president America has ever had on economic policy, on foreign policy. Now, when I made the case that he was the most radical person ever running for office, you know what? I was attacked. Now I'm making the case that he's the worst president, that the record now shows. And this is icing on the cake. Do I overstate it? And am I extreme? Are you going to urge me to be a little bit more moderate, to stand back? Am I close? Am I right? Do you have the same fears?
I think if you were to say he is potentially the most dangerous, because he so completely misunderstands reality. Let me give you a couple examples. He has recently gone out of his way to offend Karzai, who is the Afghan leader we're relying on. He's gone out of his way to be genuinely publicly nasty to Netanyahu, who is the Israeli ally we're relying on. So you get an embrace if you are Hugo Chavez. You get acceptance if you're Ahmadinejad in Iran. But if you're an American ally, somehow you're not acceptable. You're not. No. He can bully you, and I think this is a typical pattern on the left. Jimmy Carter did it to some extent, but the other thing that Obama does on a scale that Carter never dreamed of is he believes, maybe because he believes in his own rhetoric, he believes that words are a substitute for reality. And so, if you remember, you and I talked about this at the time. He goes to Prague a year ago. He gets up to give a speech on nuclear weapons as North Korea is defying him that morning.
That morning, that day, yeah.
That very day, and you have to think to yourself, isn't there a hint here of the mismatch between the deeds of dictators and the words of politicians in a democracy? And this is very much like the 1920s.